The first time that you enter a new country, that's when you start learning what the challenges will be. It is slightly challenging in the beginning, but once you've started to set up networks and once you've started to show that you're a reputable business, that's when things start to become quite streamlined.
You're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 95. What's it take to build a successful UAS remote sensing business? We explore this question and much more with Rolf Schlub, founder and director of TerraCam, a remote sensing company based in Johanesburg, South Africa. TerraCam was founded in 2011 by Rolf to satisfy the growing demand for remote sensing in a variety of industries. Using unmanned aerial platforms, TerraCam gathers image and video data that can then be processed into actionable information. As the head of TerraCam, Rolf manages the strategy and direction of the company while maintaining close collaborations with the R&D department. In this show, Rolf talks about TerraCam, its services, and the challenges and opportunities of creating a drone-based remote sensing operation. Let's pick up the interview where I asked Rolf to introduce himself.
Yeah, my name's Rolf Schlub. I'm the managing director of TerraCam. TerraCam is a professional UAV service and solutions provider. The word TerraCam is a combination of the words terrain and camera, which basically forms the foundation of most of the work that we do, which is using a camera to analyze terrain. So we've got a footprint throughout Africa, and we offer primarily aerial surveying, multispectral mapping, and integration services for enterprise clients.
What does TerraCam do? Can you describe the services that it provides?
Our core services basically revolve around aerial surveying, multispectral mapping, and then we also do integration of drone solutions for enterprise clients. So if we just firstly look at aerial surveying, it's common development or the generation of geospatial data, which includes orthomosaics, contour maps, volume reports. And then on the multispectral map side, we generate index maps for agricultural mapping. And then for integration work, what we actually do is a lot of the big mining enterprises have started to want to own this technology and operate it in-house. But they need someone to hold their hand through the entire process. They don't know what systems to choose, what system suits them best, what's the most reliable system. So we offer an integration service where we hand-hold them through the entire process. So we advise them on the recommended UAV that they need to meet their requirements, the recommended software, processing machinery, and then we facilitate and assist in the procurement as well. And then eventually we do conduct on-site training and follow-up audits afterwards to make sure that the technology integration has worked.
That's quite a menu of services. How long has the company been in business?
I started TerraCam at the end of 2011, and then we registered the business in 2012. So it's been going for around 5 years. The initial services was obviously all around aerial surveying, but as things progressed, the services started to grow as well. And there's obviously many more areas where you could provide services, but it also takes a lot of capability and capacity in order to be able to offer all these things.
What regions in Africa do you serve?
Our footprint is actually, we offer services to all countries in in Africa actually. Mostly obviously non-conflict countries. Ghana, we've worked in Ghana, Guinea, Senegal, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Zambia, Botswana, and Rwanda. Those are the countries that we've serviced so far. We've had to decline some work for conflict countries like Sudan and things like that, but generally our services are offered throughout Africa.
And for those that may not know what remote sensing is, can you give us a simple description?
One of the best ways to describe remote sensing is it's the science of obtaining information about objects or areas from a distance. So this is typically done through aircraft or satellites, or in this case also drones. The sensors are typically either active or passive, with active sensors emitting active radiation towards an object, so they themselves provide the energy to illuminate it, and then subsequently measure the reflected response. Those kind of sensors would, for example, be radar, LiDAR, microwaves, etc. And then the other type of sensor is a passive sensor, which basically just responds to an object which is illuminated by another light source, or generally the sun, like a spectrometer or an imaging camera or radiometer. That would be a passive sensor. So it's basically, in a nutshell, it's sensing objects remotely.
Which industries do you typically serve?
So the industries that use this the most, if we just look at, for example, LiDARs, is the mining industry. Mining industry uses it extensively for rehabilitation work as well, environmental work, remediation work. Of course, agriculture is a huge client as well. And then, of course, land use planning for governments. They use this kind of technology as well. So, but remote sensing, in essence, is used in so many industries that it would be difficult to explain how many industries that it filters down to.
Can you walk us through a couple of case studies to give us a better idea of how you're using drones?
Just looking at agriculture, which is one of the biggest adopters of this technology initially. And one of the most proven benefits there is the ability to detect variability within crops. So they use remote sensing. They've used satellites for a long time, and drones are now obviously being used more and more extensively in the agriculture. So the drones allow you to detect variability, which basically allows you to do targeted fertilizer and nutrient applications. So instead of having to walk a field manually and identifying where the stresses in the crops are or where there's issues in the field, the drone will be able to cover a much larger area in a shorter amount of time, and then allow the farmer to do targeted fertilizer or nutrient or pesticide or herbicide application. Another benefit or another case study was done for an insurance company. It was basically a big hailstorm over a crop field, cash crop. And then we used drones in order to fly it and quantify the amount of damage that was caused by the hail, and then that subsequently was used to justify the insurance claim value. If you're looking at big farms, those insurance claims can be quite significant, so there's a huge value add to that.
Of the many applications that you provide, which ones are the most in demand right now? Is it mining, agriculture, or something else?
It's mostly agriculture at the moment for the remote sensing work. So agriculture is definitely one of the biggest users of this application for remote sensing.
I find that curious because here in the United States, agriculture has been touted as a major use case for drones, but it hasn't really caught on a wide-scale basis yet. Why do you think it's such a high demand in Africa?
The thing in South Africa is that we're probably lagging a little bit behind the US and maybe Europe in terms of technology adoption. But the reason it's done so well in South Africa is because there was a big hype created about it. There was a lot of initial marketing done to that particular industry, and the interest was significant. Whereas in the States, I think also generally globally, the legislations are starting to impact negatively on farming applications, because in order to cover a farm, you basically can't have restrictions that don't allow you to fly beyond visual line of sight. And that's something that's become an issue globally, that you're not allowed to fly drones beyond visual line of sight, inhibiting you from covering large areas like farmland.
Do you have those regulations in South Africa? Are you able to fly beyond visual line of sight now?
In South Africa, we actually have, to be honest, some of the most strictest drone regulations that they could have imposed. They were basically copied more or less from manned aircraft aviation. So if you want to run a drone business in South Africa, it's basically like running an airline. You need to have an air service license, you need to have an operator certificate, the guys need to have proper pilot qualifications, medicals, and so forth. So this has been a negative impact in terms of rolling this out on a large scale. So our main strategy was when these strict drone regulations got into play, we actually sought business outside South Africa. And the way that Africa works at this point in time is that it's very much military governed. So all the flying that's done in African countries is actually authorized by the military and then kind of vetoed by the civil aviation authorities. But it's actually the defense industries that make the call. It runs fairly informally. It's not as close to as governed as, for example, the States, Australia, Canada, or South Africa. In fact, 85 to 90% of our work that we do right now is outside South African borders.
Are the rules for flying a drone pretty much the same in those countries?
In a lot of those countries, they haven't been legislated yet. Basically, there is no rules that has been legislated or gazetted in the government that defines operation of drones. So only South Africa at the moment has got it legislated. The other countries in Africa are slowly but surely catching on as well. And we're monitoring development of those rules quite closely. Well, a lot of African countries are member of the ICAO states, International Civil Aviation Organization, and they've got guidelines that then end up being rolled out to each individual state in terms of what their legislation should be.
Now, because you are operating in these other countries, are you providing any baseline data to agencies to show that flying beyond line of sight can be done safely and responsibly?
It's always difficult to argue against legislation that's been signed into law. So even though there have been countless studies that have shown that it can be done safely, the legislation is quite clear about what your operational limits are. So if you just quickly look at beyond visual line of sight, not even the States has made provision for any beyond visual line of sight at this point in time. And in South Africa as well. If I would apply for a beyond visual line of sight request, they wouldn't even look at it probably for the next 2 to 3 years. So everything that they're doing at the moment is considering only a line of sight and maybe extended visual line of sight. Even though we've got some pretty solid safety cases, it's going to be a bit of time before they start looking at that.
So do you look at the future with a lot of optimism? Or are you always looking over your shoulder wondering what kind of regulations might be coming down the pipe?
I do look at it with optimism. I believe very strongly in technology. Technology's got a lot of potential. But at the end of the day, it's always the question, what can we do versus what are we allowed to do? So if I look at the States and Australia recently, they've relaxed their initial regulations a little bit. So they've come in with regulations that govern very light UAS, so up to 2 kilograms. And they're basically trying to boost the industry. They're trying to really get more people involved without having this red tape that kind of creates a big tranche between legal and illegal operators. So I think that's very proactive from the FAA and civil aviations in Australia. And I think South Africa will eventually catch on, but it'll probably take a little bit of time. So that's why in the meantime, we've decided that we're going to go into countries that don't have such strict regulations or no regulations, and that where we can really maximize on the potential of the technology in the interim and just monitor the developments.
Describe for us the drone industry in Africa. Is it growing fast? Are there a lot of competitors, or is it still evolving with you guys being the primary service provider right now?
Okay, so we were definitely the first mover, and that gave us some opportunities, but it also ended up being a little bit difficult. South Africa has become quite a saturated market, especially in the aerial photography and filming business. The power of the drones that are coming onto the market these days is unbelievable. So every guy can walk into a store and get himself Phantom 4 Professional or an Inspire and basically start his own videography or photography company. So what we've seen in Africa is that the adoption rate is lower. It's just not as developed as the rest of the world, which gives us obviously a lot of leverage to grow into those countries. And the countries that we have worked in, Senegal, especially Zimbabwe, we do a lot of work in those countries. And they slowly but surely seeing some guys getting onto the bandwagon, but in terms of capabilities, it's nowhere close to what we were able to offer. So that's why we found a lot of potential in those countries.
What have been some of the biggest challenges that you've had to overcome in starting this business?
I think one of the biggest challenges and opportunity at the same time was being one of the first movers and innovators. So we ended up basically running, not before we could walk, but we developed so many products initially that the market basically wasn't ready for. Only seeing them being adopted now, 4 years later. So the mining and agricultural industry are generally slow adopters. So in the beginning, we did a lot of testing and trials to kind of convince them and validate the technology and its effectiveness, which obviously hurt us a little bit in terms of cash flow. But we're seeing the returns of investment now. Another challenge was that we got hit by a major El Nino drought last year and the year before, which basically caused a lot of the agricultural industry to restrict spending. And we had a lot of agricultural products that we were planning on rolling out, and that we eventually couldn't roll out just because, the rains didn't come and the guys were not spending any money. Basically, there was nothing to map at the end of the day. And I think the other one would be the saturation of the market, because it's a very cool industry to be in. Guys got into it very, very quickly. So at the end of the day, it becomes basically a price battle as well. And that also becomes a challenge. But we always offer new products which basically kind of differentiate us from the others. In terms of opportunities, the opportunities are literally endless. It really is endless, from inspection work to surveying work, surveillance work. It's really, really impressive what we're able to do.
When you say you rolled out different agricultural products, what do you mean by that? What type of products differentiates TerraCam from other companies?
We were basically using advanced analytics to, for example, count maize stems in order to see the effect or the rate of germination on a particular field. And they basically allow the farmer to give him enough time to replant maize in order to get optimum harvest. So that was one of the products that we were rolling out. The other product was, and this was all done with a joint venture with an agricultural company, was to basically do soil mapping, but from the air. So identifying different soil colors and thereby reducing the amount of time that a soil scientist would need to spend in the field doing auger points. So we'd basically be able to classify soil colors based on just aerial imagery. So those were basically some of the two products that we were really looking at. Also irradiation mapping, using digital elevation models from fields in order to maximize the position of how to harvest. And then also drainage, contour line or key line design. We were using the elevation models on bare fields in order to develop key lines from drone data that would then be input into tractors and for them to develop their runoff contours.
You said something that caught my attention about developing products in cooperation with agricultural research firms. Can you expand upon how your research and development outreach works into new products?
Basically, we are dealt with a problem, and then we solve that problem with some kind of analytical solution, usually by means of drone. So the agricultural companies, they are in touch with all the farming cooperatives. They have a whole bunch of agronomists working for them. So those guys know what the in-field problems are or the challenges they have or the things that they would want to perhaps do quicker. Basically, we identify those and then we find a solution to match using the technology that we've got. And then we basically do in-house programming as well. So if there's any scripts that we need to write or programs that we need to develop, then we would do that in-house. And then kind of do some R&D work in the field in order to justify the technology or the results and then roll that out to the client. That's basically how our interactions go.
That's interesting because I think it's easy to believe that in regard to remote sensing in agriculture, all one has to do is fly a drone, take some images, and deliver them to the client so they can assess the status of their fields. And that may be one way to go about it. But it sounds like you guys go a few steps further by trying to understand the problem and the potential solutions before you even launch.
Absolutely. There's obviously also been a lot of misconceptions with the drone industry, a lot of false marketing in a way. The guys were looking towards drones as being able to identify what kind of worms are eating or working on the leaves or what kind of pest is causing some kind of deficiency in the field. So they were expecting more, possibly due to a lot of marketing done by the industry, but we come with real-world solutions to real-world problems, and it's not possible by means of drone. Then we look at it from a satellite perspective as well. So we don't limit ourselves strictly to drones only, because we have found specifically in agriculture that the amount of data that we were producing was actually beyond what the farmer was able to comprehend. I mean, if you look at a 3,000 hectare farmland, then the orthophoto alone would be over 1 gig in size. So the guys on the farms are generally not very well developed in terms of IT infrastructure. So these are the kind of real world problems that we also identified. We were looking at rolling out cloud solutions where we would present the data digitally to them on cloud basis and they would view it on the cloud, and only to find out that the communication or the telecommunication infrastructure in a lot of those remote areas was not even good enough to download emails. So then we had to go back to hard copies. So the industry developed a lot, and I think it still needs to learn a lot in terms of what's actually possible by means of drones and what's actually feasible, and basically to satisfy the needs of the farmer.
How large are the farms that you usually fly over?
So the farms, they vary quite a lot in size. Orchard work is usually quite small if you look at orchards. And then if obviously cash crops, wheat, maize, sunflower, those farms are normally 500 hectares. And then we did some forestry projects up in Ghana where we flew 7,500 hectares. So they do vary quite in size depending on the type of crop and the actual needs of the farmer. But they're usually above 500 hectares for cash crops.
From a business standpoint, are there any challenges in working across so many different borders?
I suppose the first time that you enter a new country, that's when you start learning what the challenges will be. So it's always put the one foot in and then see what happens. Over the years, we've gotten to kind of understand the way that these countries work. And I can tell you, each country works totally different to one another. So it is slightly challenging in the beginning, but once you've started to set up networks and once you've started to show that you're a reputable business, that's when things start to become quite streamlined. I can just give you Zimbabwe as an example. When we did a job there for the first time, they impounded all our equipment. And we had to basically spend a couple of days sorting out and sifting through the necessary paperwork in order to get our equipment out of the customs deadlock there. But now we have a monthly contract where we survey stockpiles there. We basically pass through customs within 15 minutes. So you start to learn how these countries operate and it becomes easier with time.
Is your entire operation based in Johannesburg, or do you have staff deployed in other countries?
So we basically mobilize to each individual country from South Africa. So our head office is here. We have representatives in different countries. In Zimbabwe, for example, we had a representative in Namibia as well, in Botswana. But there's not enough work at the moment in order to justify having a full-time team in the country, although Zimbabwe is starting to head that way. It all depends eventually on what does the market need, and then having someone reliable in country in order to run it and then develop it into something that can be sustainable.
What's the primary hardware and software that you use?
Having worked and developed SenseFly drones, we use the Swinglet Cam, we use 2 SenseFly EB drones. We've got a host of different types of multi-rotors from DJI and from Terrat. And then we use Pix4D for processing. Pix4D, probably one of the best photogrammetry processing software around. And I also know the guys very well, and their capability has really developed amazingly from when we started. I mean, when we started, there was no desktop-based solution. It was all cloud-based. And when they started bringing out desktop processing solutions, that changed our lives immediately, because considering our telecommunications infrastructure, we could get results out much more quickly. And the software has just gotten extremely powerful. So Pix4D is definitely the software of choice for us.
Tell us more about yourself, Rolf. How did you come to start a drone-based business in Johannesburg?
I was born and raised in South Africa. My parents came from Europe. My father from Switzerland, my mom from Spain. Studied aeronautical engineering at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. And then I spent 7 years working as a design and project engineer on several Airbus projects, namely the A320, A350, and the A400M. That was for companies like Denel, which is our major defense contractor. And then also in Switzerland, I worked on the Airbus A350 project for the major defense contractor there. And then while I was working in Switzerland, I coincidentally met the founders of SenseFly. And at that point, that was a small robotics spin-off from the EPFL school in Lausanne. And they basically needed someone to develop an airframe to house and fly their sensors. So that's basically how I became part of their team, and I started to design the first Swinglet Cam for them. And that drone ended up being very successful, and they got a major cash injection from Parrot that eventually led to the development of the SenseFly EB and all the other drones that they have in their product line. And so that's basically how it all started.
How far back was that? When did you start working with SenseFly?
That was around about 2009. As I was working for RUAG, one of the project managers that was working there ended up being one of the co-founders of SenseFly. And when she left, she basically remembered that I was good at conceptual designing, and then I ended up getting involved in the design of their drones.
How did you go from SenseFly to starting TerraCam?
I've also got a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit inside me, so I've always wanted to basically run my own business. So seeing this major opportunity and being involved with drone development even from the get-go, especially commercial drones at that point in time were brand new in the market. I mean, the likes of DJI and things like that were very undertone at that point. I saw massive opportunities back in Africa, so I took that technology with me. I took one single Swinglet Cam with me back to South Africa and basically started TerraCam, cold calling surveyors, mine surveyors, land surveyors, and then just basically educating the people on the technology and just growing the business organically from there.
Have you had the opportunity to design any drones recently? Sort of harking back to your days at SenseFly?
Look, I miss it, to be honest. I don't do that much anymore. I did help them a little bit on the Albris drone, which is their multi-rotor drone, when I was back there to do some modifications on the EB. We do a little bit of in-house development, mounting thermal cameras onto different types of platforms. But what I have found out is that the guys that do get into just pure drone development, you need a lot of funding for that. So because there's a lot of high-tech companies that are involved in this business that are developing unbelievable systems. And if you want to compete with that, you need some serious funding. I mean, SenseFly picked up when they basically got bought out by Parrot. And Pix4D also got bought out by Parrot. So they ended up getting a lot of capital, and they just skyrocketed and became very successful. But I've also seen guys developing drones that ended up not being able to reach the market just because the DJI Phantom 4 that's being brought out now costs a fraction of the price and can do 10 times more. So that's why I've kind of restricted myself in terms of furthering myself to development, but I do miss, developing drones.
You mentioned earlier that you always wanted to be an entrepreneur. With the company 5 years old now, how's the experience been? Is being an entrepreneur everything that you hoped it would be?
Look, I suppose no one can really prepare you for the challenges that you encounter. I mean, it's been very rewarding at the end of the day. I've learned a hell of a lot. What I learned in 5 years was basically 10 times more than what I learned, 15 years of being an employee. So being an entrepreneur is something special because you basically eventually end up reaping the rewards. But it always depends on the type of business that you're an entrepreneur in. In my case, being a first mover, we had a lot of advantages in the beginning. A lot of people that ended up getting into this market as entrepreneurs ended up not doing so well just because they weren't there from the start. So it's been an interesting experience.
What advice would you give to someone that was thinking about starting a drone-based business?
You need to be quite knowledgeable in this industry. What they should probably do is do a lot of market research, a lot of studies, a lot of market research, and come with facts that they can end up basically selling on hard facts. Because a lot of empty promises can also lead to a destroyed business. So I think a good market knowledge, good research, a good business plan, understanding of the limitations and the regulations, that should basically help you to get through the business. We've basically succeeded on our side by just keeping overheads low, even through hard times. Like, for example, when the regulations kicked in, I mean, a lot of the operations that we were doing, we had to get stopped up until certification. So we had to basically let 2 guys go after that. That's also something that you can't really foresee. But I think this industry's developed to be a very prospective business.
What's your take on where the drone industry might be headed in Africa?
The regulations, they're going to be relaxed over time, and the drones are also going to get more and more sophisticated. So you'll start seeing them having detect and avoid solutions on board. You're already seeing now a lot of the drones will be coming out with ADS-B transponders, so the integration into manned aircraft airspace will be basically the next step to watch. And that will basically pave the way towards certified beyond visual line of sight flying. The only challenge is that you're basically hurting the small guy that wants to just do some aerial work, because you've now imposed this massive burden. And in our case in South Africa, to run a drone business legally, you need a minimum of 3 employees. The ongoing cost, the overhead costs just to maintain the license, never mind getting work in, is quite high. It's kind of deterred things a little bit for the moment. So everyone's is very hopeful towards some relaxations that will open up the doors a little bit.
Yeah, that really makes a big difference. One of the attractive aspects of the industry in the United States is the relatively low cost to get started. But in South Africa, a person has some real challenges to overcome right out of the box.
Absolutely. Once they opened the drone schools for drone pilots, I think at this point in time there are probably 200, 300, or 400 guys with pilots, but there's only 12 certified companies. So, you have all these pilots that obviously went to these flying schools in order to get towards flying, but ended up being involved in this massive certification loop. And to get a certification here can take up to 12 months. If you've decided to get into this business, you have a 12-month lead time in order to get any work done, never mind starting your marketing. So I think they were under pressure to get something in place, so they took manned aircraft regulations and rolled that out and said, let's see where we go from here. I think that's what the future will entail, is where do the regulations go from here.
What are the major plans for the company for the future?
We basically want to try and explore more of African countries. So we want to develop this more into African countries and get a foothold into some of the key regions. West Africa, for example, we want to basically really expand services there and focus more on integration work. That's basically our main objective, is to focus more and more on integration work, helping mining companies, or even agricultural companies rolling out this technology and hand-holding them through the process.
Finally, Rolf, what do you hope customers or clients walk away with after doing business with TerraCam?
Look, we pride ourselves on quality. So that's our primary objective, is to deliver a professional service on time that delivers a quality product. Also keeping the innovation stream going. So, we enjoy innovation. We enjoy finding solutions to problems. I think customers appreciate that. And I think that's basically allowed us to stay afloat this long and grow the business. And we've been able to double our turnover every year since inception. So we hope to carry that on and just become one of the most reputable UAV brands in Africa.
That's it for episode 95 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed listening to Rolf Schlub of TerraCam and learning about the challenges and opportunities of creating a drone-based remote sensing business. I want to thank Rolf for sharing his time, perspectives, and expertise. If you want to learn more about TerraCam or want to connect with Rolf, check out their website at terracam.co.za. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a positive review on iTunes. It always helps. Thanks for downloading, and I hope you'll listen to more episodes of the Drone Radio Show podcast to hear how others are using drones for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Goers.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.